All right, welcome to 2.1 II. So we will go over 2.1 II of the AP World History course. Over here, new belief systems and cultural traditions that emerged and spread, often asserting universal truths. So this is important as associated with Judaism or Hinduism from 2.1 I. And other than Zoroastrianism, which is semi-universalist, we see this new spread of universality. Well, what does this mean? Judaism and Hinduism were not missionary religions. They were not meant to preach. They did not go out. They were much more confined to a geographic region and a certain ethnic group. Whereas the new religions of Buddhism and Christianity will have universal truths assigned to them, which is interesting because, of course, we know Buddhism is an offshoot of Hinduism, much like Christianity is a derivation of Judaism. So if you ever want to make that connection, we have Hinduism and Judaism, both ancient religions, starting some of our earliest ones from period 1. Well, they weren't from period 1, but they start in period 1, they move on to period 2. Buddhism and Christianity are offshoots. They started as reforms to both of those religions. They were rejected, became then their own religions that created a universalist message and a missionary group and became larger. Well, Buddhism didn't become that much larger than Hinduism. Actually, I think there are more Hindus than Buddhists, but Christianity becomes much, much larger throughout history than Judaism. So let's talk about Buddhism. The core beliefs of Buddhism about desire, suffering, and the search of enlightenment. Buddhism reforms Hinduism, and in doing so gets away with, or does away with, a couple of things. The first is the caste system. So remember, Buddhism tries to be a reform of Hinduism, and so it wants to change Hinduism. Hinduism doesn't accept these changes. It creates its own religion, and these are the changes that it does in its own religion. So the first one is the caste system. It abolishes it. It says, everyone can gain enlightenment. There is no caste system. Promotes equality. One of the things that this does, which is important, is that Buddhism then appeals to the lower castes of Hinduism. There are many more Shudra converts than there are Brahmin converts. The next is the deities, or the pantheon of Hindu gods. Buddhism doesn't outright say, they're gone, they're false, but they're not important. They don't have an influence on your life. They're not relevant. What really matters is you and your road to enlightenment. The last one is in Dharma. In Hinduism, your Dharma varies depending on your caste. So a Brahma's Dharma is different than a Shudra's Dharma, meaning what your job is. Are you doing your role well? And this is most famous if you remember Hinduism. If a warrior desires peace, he is doing his dharma poorly. You have to be a warrior. You're born into something. You have a job to do. Go do your job. Whenever I think of this, I think of that Will Ferrell cartoon Megamind, where he's like the villain and Brad Pitt is like the Superman type character, but avoiding the copyrights. And in the movie, Superman just decides not to do his job anymore, despite being impervious and fast and does all this stuff. He's like, I'm sick of saving the world. I want to be a guitar hero or whatever. He would have horrible dharma. I mean, he clearly was given a gift. He's choosing not to do that gift. People will suffer because of his desire to follow his own path rather than the path he was born into. He needs to do his dharma. Whereas the Buddhist version of dharma is usually just referred to the teachings of the Buddha and how the universe works. So you don't have a particular dharma. The dharma is just roughly how the universe works. Now, we get into the differences of Dharma. I know I've spent the most time on that. Maybe the least important for this course, but you do want to know the caste system and the deities as far as changes go. Now, what stays the same? Karma. Karma totally stays the same. There is not a difference. Because in Buddhism and in Hinduism, karma is more like gravity. It just happens, right? You wouldn't change it. It's just the way the universe works. Your actions will be judged. And the next is the cycle of samsara, birth, death, and rebirth. Both of them believe this will happen, it will continue to happen, and it's not something you want. It is a wandering. You want release from these cycles. You want to get out of them. So in Hinduism and samsara, your Atman wants to release and join with the Brahman, or the universal spirit. That can happen for worthy Brahmins. Buddhism, on the other hand, doesn't believe necessarily in this Brahman, but there is this kind of universal collection of feelings and senses and souls and intangibles that make up all living life, known as an anatta. So rather than gaining moksha, you desire nirvana. Both of them are ending the cycle of samsara and transcending to another level of understanding and connection with the universe. The nitpickiness doesn't really need to happen. I would actually call them very similar for this course, karma and samsara. These are the differences doctrinally between the two. An important Buddhist you want to know is Ashoka. Ashoka is a Mauryan emperor, born as a Hindu, and then converts to Buddhism. After his conversion to Buddhism, he promotes Buddhism within the empire, building these pillars throughout the empire with Buddhist teachings and Buddhist writings, and really creates a space for the religion to grow within the Mauryan Empire. Now, this does not last. Okay, it is not a permanent fixture in South Asia. That's not entirely true. It is a permanent fixture. It's not a main fixture. It's not a main force in South Asia and the Indian subcontinent. Hinduism will envelop and take back many people as it adapts and changes to Buddhism, Buddhism's success in conversion. It will move away from some of the rote practices that it has to a more personal spirituality and gain a lot more followers back. Now that's a garbling of the concept, but it's just good to know that Buddhism, though pushed by Ashoka, so the key is you want to know Ashoka is the emperor born into after putting down a rebellion, sees the bloodshed, converts to Buddhism. The story goes he then becomes more peaceful, and he does open up Buddhism within India, or the Indian subcontinent. And then what happens is Buddhism will spread through the efforts of missionaries and merchants and the establishment of educational institutions. And that spread will happen both in East Asia, Southeast Asia, and into Oceania. So you want to know that through merchants and through missionaries, Buddhism will spread. Now, during this time period, Buddhism will not take great root in any real region. It will not be the dominant religion yet. However, in China, after the fall of the Han Dynasty, is when Buddhism will really take hold. If you remember, Buddhism focuses on the beliefs of desire and suffering and the alleviation of them. And after the fall of the Han Dynasty, we see quite a bit of suffering. And so Buddhism will gain an appeal as it alleviates suffering in China. So though Buddhism will come at the beginning of the Han Dynasty and be introduced there, it will really gain a foothold during the fall of the Han Dynasty and that period of warfare between the Han and the Tang. All right, let's talk about Confucianism. Confucius' core beliefs and writings originated in the writing and lessons of Confucius. They were elaborated by key disciples who sought to promote social harmony by outlining proper rituals and social relationships for all people in China, including rulers. So what we want to remember about Confucianists is the 5 key relationships. Okay? This is ruler to subject, father to son, husband to wife, older brother to younger brother, and friend to friend. And these relationships are unequal relationships, meaning there was someone in power in each thing. Now, we don't need to get into how that works, between friend and friend. Your friend, is more powerful than you. That's not what it works. It means that in different scenarios, one person may have more influence or know more things. But what it really is a way to order society. So the 5 key relationships are a way to order society. Confucius comes to power during the Warring States period. He is one of the philosophers we have among many. The 3 most famous will create Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. Confucius, of course, creates Confucianism. And what he basically says is the Shang have let society kind of fall over. People aren't following their proper roles. Lords are acting bigger than they are. They're acting like kings when they don't deserve to be. People are rising up. They're getting bigger than their britches. And we need an order to society. And so what he says, the way that we order society is by creating these strong relationships, the proper relationships, and everybody knows their place in society. The other thing he said is he was very family-oriented. The family was a key. So if you had a strong family, then that's why we have, husband and wife is one of the relationships, father and son, older brother to younger brother. If you create a strong family where everybody knows what they're doing well, the relationships are strong, the family is then strong, you have a lot of good families, you have a good community, you have a lot of strong communities, and you have a strong nation. So you build it at a core foundation where everybody knows their job, and you move through that. Qin Shi Huangdi does not follow Confucianism. He follows legalism, where you have strict laws with very harsh punishments. He comes in, he uses that to create a militaristic state where he can take over and unify the rest of China, ending the Warring States period. But once he unifies it, nobody likes legalism anymore, so he gets overthrown by the Han. The Han are adherents of Confucianism. So when the Han come in, this is when they bring in Confucianism. Now, Confucianism melds very well with the mandate of heaven. And as time goes on, Confucianism and Buddhism will have this kind of symbiosis as well in Chinese society. So, again, the Han Dynasty will really push Confucianism and establish it as a way to govern. They do this most famously by instituting the examination system. And what are the examinations on? They're the exams on Chinese philosophy of Confucius, the Analects, the lessons by his followers and key disciples, their writings, the poetry. That's what you are tested on in the Confucius examination system. So again, Confucianism will not be universal, and it's not a religious, it's a moral code. It's a way to organize Chinese society. And because it's a moral code, it's able to work well with Buddhism when Buddhism moves in. You can be both. You can be a Confucius as the way you organize your moral society, and then look for enlightenment through Buddhism. They are not necessarily conflicting ideas. Because it's not a religion, more of a moral code, we can connect with the idea of Greco-Roman philosophy, where you emphasize logic. You don't do as much science and empirical observation in Confucianism, but it's not a religion, it's more of a moral code on how to organize the world in which. So we have Confucius for Confucianism, we have Han Fei for legalism. You want to know Han Fei. Han Fei, even though they don't write about him. And then you have Lao Tzu for Taoism, or you can spell it Lao Tzu or Lao Tzu. This is the problem with transliteration, is there's multiple things, but it's Lao Tzu. And he creates Taoism. The key religious things you want to know about Taoism is that there is a belief in the balance between humans and nature. And that Taoism wants you to remove yourself from politics, the worries of this world, and focus more on nature. You can maybe call them hippies, something like that. But it is a philosophy that grabs a hold within China with Confucianism, at the same time as Confucianism. These two don't often get along, because Confucianism, of course, is how you organize politics, how you organize things, and Taoism is more of how you become one with nature. However, the two of them, along with Buddhism and strands of legalism and many different ideas, will create kind of this mixture of Chinese culture during the subsequent dynasties. So it's important to understand how Taoism comes about. In many cases, it will have a big influence on Chinese culture. We've explained how Confucianism will, but Taoism will as well. And what it'll do is it will influence in these ways. First, in medical theories and practices, poetry, metallurgy, and architecture. So the key to Taoism is to remove yourself from politics and to understand how the world works. And by understanding how the world works, you look into medical theories, you look into how the body works, you try different things, you understand different things, and you just become healthier. And because of that, they do a lot of things that we wouldn't do today, like, they try alchemy, and that's how we get into metallurgy. They're really trying to understand how metals work, and so what Taoists will do is they'll take metals and they'll just mix them together, see what happens, see what doesn't happen. Because of that, they'll create great metallurgy. Poetry, same type of thing. I've spent a lot of time observing nature, understanding it, and really set the tone artistically for nature. Next one is medical theories and practices. If I'm understanding the body, if I'm understanding nature, I'm going to learn how things work better. And this is through a lot of trial and error. They don't do the smartest things all the time, but they do discover quite a bit about the human body and how it needs to work. And so a lot of this is through discovery and understanding of nature. The last one is Taoist architecture. When you think of traditional Chinese architecture, that is Taoist. Okay? And this is where we also get feng shui, harmonizing your surroundings with your environment, connected with Taoism. Okay, cutting wood in particular ways so it goes with the grain, building your building, orienting things so that your environment envelops what you're doing. And so Taoism in many ways is connecting yourself with nature, not suppressing nature like we see in other places where you say, okay, I want something here, so I'm going to tear everything down and build it the way I want it. It's to say, this is nature. How can I live in accordance with it? And because of that, this architectural, poetic, metallurgical, these styles are going to come because of that mentality. So hopefully now you're able to analyze Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And again, along with legalism and Han Fei, which is harsh punishments with a strict legal code. It's great for dictatorships. This is the Han Fei concept, which is people can't be trusted. They're naturally evil, so they need a strong, powerful leader to whip them into shape. Great for building up a military, which is exactly what Shi Huangdi does. He unifies the military of his province. He comes in and he takes over and creates his dynasty. However, military dictatorships are not great for then organizing and making the populace happy, and so it's taken over. The Han then take over Confucianism. Taoism will continue as a subgroup within China, not necessarily endorsed like Confucianism or legalism is, but it will become one of the mixes just like Buddhism is. Okay, the next group we want to talk about is Christianity. Now, Christianity will have a lot of comparisons with Buddhism, like we said before. It comes from one of the period 1 religions, and then it is universalist. And, as we've talked in the last video, it is not the same everywhere. There are different versions of Christianity throughout its history. But that is true for all of the other religions as well. Buddhism changes and moves as well, and creates its own different versions. We, of course, know Mahayana and Theravada, but that will be discussed more in later time frames. So, of course, Christianity is based on the divinity of Jesus of Nazareth, recorded by his disciples. Jesus, much like the Buddha, does not create an organization. It is disciples afterwards. Jesus is an itinerant street preacher, really pushed by Peter and Paul, and the religion grows after his death. He does not organize a large religion during his lifetime. Christianity does follow Jewish, Roman, and Hellenistic influences, and despite being initially hostile, the Roman Empire will endorse fully Christianity within a few decades after the reign of Constantine. So let's go through that really. So during the Pax Romana, Christianity, which comes out of this area, starts to spread. And this comes through preaching and merchants, much like Buddhism. And it spreads in large cities, and under the legal framework of the Pax Romana, it starts to spread, and it is persecuted early on. However, Constantine, during some struggles in the Roman Empire, as the story goes, sees a vision. Christ comes to him, says, if you put my symbol on your shield, you will win. The Battle of Malvian Bridge, he puts the symbol on the shields, he wins the battle, and afterwards he says, now I'm a Christian. Traditionally, historically, we say he looked at Christianity and said, this is a religion in which I can unify my empire. Because prior to this, there were many different religions, many different belief systems, and as it was becoming more diverse, there was less of a unity. He wanted something he could unify. Now, it's important here to note that Christians prior to Constantine were usually lower members of society. Once the emperor converts, Christianity becomes in vogue, and many high-ranking people will then convert. And the snowball effect starts to happen, even though a couple of later emperors will try to revert back to paganism and the Roman pantheon and the traditional Roman beliefs. Christianity has set a foothold, and within a few centuries, it is the official religion of the Roman Empire, and it's set up. Now, like we've said before, it's important to note that for the years before Constantine comes in, there are many different versions of Christianity talking. There is quite a bit of discussion among different patriarchies and different churches and different groups. They talk, they write letters, they discuss things, but there are different beliefs happening. So when Constantine comes in, he thinks he has one church. He does not. He has multiple churches, and so he comes in and he says, this is what Christianity is. And for the next, history of Christianity, people are trying to decide exactly what Christianity is. We have the Nicene Creed. We have people that adhere to that. But there will never be one universalist Christianity ever. There are so many different sects of it. The key here that you want to know is that it becomes a unifying force. Even though there are different versions, and by the end of this time period, we'll even see starts of the breaks between what was then Christianity in the West with the Pope and the emperor, the Byzantine emperor. There's this rule between church and not state, but of emperor. It is important to note that even though there are different sects, in many cases there is this kind of unity among Christians, that Christianity creates a cohesive kind of moral framework and moral bedrock for how laws, culture, and understanding happens. And this will reinforce aristocracies, peasants, and leadership as well, with a new kind of clerical or priest class associated with the church, whether it be Coptic, Monophysite, Arian, Catholic, Byzantine, Orthodox, or some other. Last one you want to know is Greco-Roman philosophy and science, emphasizing logic, imperial observation, and the natural political power and hierarchy. So rather than look towards a deity, what will happen in Greco-Roman philosophy is they will look to see how the world works. The Greek and Roman pantheon of Zeus, of Hera, of these deities that are, like humans, don't really connect a lot with people. I mean, look at these guys. They're out for themselves. They have human characteristics. You'd never pray to Zeus to look for alleviation of suffering. You might pray to him to help you conquer his enemies, but compared to Buddhism or Christianity, as far as my life becoming better doing these things, Zeus and the pantheon here do not do the same job. So what happens is there's a move towards logic, empirical observation, just understanding how the world works, going out and really trying to do different, looking at things, observing things, writing these treaties, debating over them. We're not yet into, the scientific method by any stretch of the imagination, but there is kind of a scientistic mentality here, which is to say, okay, the gods aren't going to work for us, so let's try to find a different way to understand the universe and understand our roles within it. And so many different philosophies come out. Stoics, different things like this, ways to look at the world. The key here is the reason why they move to this, and then the effects of it is that they have a better understanding of how the world works. Much like Taoism, as a result of understanding the natural world, they become better at medical, poetry, metallurgy, architecture. This happens as well in Greco-Roman philosophy. The Library of Alexandria is all about understanding and gaining knowledge. It's during this time period where they say, well, let's understand how big the earth is. Again, in many cases, this does not have to conflict with other religious traditions. The last thing you want to know is that art and architecture reflect the values of religions and belief systems. Now, that doesn't mean that, one Christians think that God will take care of them so we don't need a roof because he'll stop the rains. Everyone has a regular building. But the religions will influence a cultural kind of standard of what architecture will look like. So it will create this cultural tradition manifested through these types of architecture. The art, on the other hand, will be influenced by Buddhist and Christianity. A lot of the art will follow that. The Greco-Romans art will be all about the human body, understanding that, whereas this will be more of a religious connotation. These will be of deities and their stories, the epics of Hinduism. So now we have an understanding of the religions, what's happening. You want to know the hows and whys, and if you want to test yourself, as always, answer these questions. There's none over here. If you can answer these questions, if you could tell someone, assess the impact of different ideologies, philosophies, and religions had on social hierarchies. If you were able to compare Buddhist hierarchies to Christian hierarchies and how the religions did this, you're in game. But this is a rough overview, and there you go.